We're in strange times. I mean, if you open Twitter at any point and you just start scrolling, if you were not initiated, if you did not already come to Twitter with some sort of like philosophical grounding or worldview whatsoever, you just wouldn't know what to think. It's just such a random hodgepodge of narratives delivered so strongly and in many cases convincingly if you're not aware of how to get the underlying facts. What happened? How did we get here? What's the earliest sign you remember of this trend taking shape, and how did it progress to this point?
I think Fox News is a major contributor to this. I think that it was, prior to the advent of social media, Fox News really pioneered this sort of like hermetically sealed information bubble, and they've monetized it to an extraordinary extent. Even now, they're still by far the most successful mainstream media network. And another thing you all should remember is that when Fox tries to position itself as the alternative, they are the mainstream. They are bigger than CNN. They are bigger than MSNBC. And so then you get these, alternate media spaces and influencers in that space. They take that Fox formula and run with it, and they're assisted by algorithms and everything. And I think that's where we are. I think it's a consequence, really, of multiple things, but I think Fox News is probably the single greatest one.
Right. I think alternative media it plays a very valuable role in today's discourse, but and legacy media gets a lot of flack. The problem with alternative media as it currently is that there are not only it lacks layers of accountability that legacy media has. So in legacy media, if you're a journalist and you get some story wrong, you can suffer reputational damage, you can lose your job, these sorts of things. This does not exist for Tim Pool. This does not exist for Steven Crowder. There are incentives for them to lie. And I think that's a huge reason why people are confused. They're actively obfuscating, and they're getting financially rewarded to an insane degree. Tim Pool was being paid, reportedly, $5 million a year from Russians to lie to people. So, I don't know how you solve for that. That's an interesting conversation in itself.
Million with an M, correct? 5 million?
Million, yes.
Tim, if you're watching, we want to know if you're going to give the money back.
But speaking of Tim Pool, I'm pretty sure there were reports that after Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, they immediately ramped up their information online strategy, their PSYOPs essentially, and now it feels like we've created this perfect ecosystem where Elon Musk takes over Twitter, he allows the unfettered spreading of disinformation. We have pundits like, Vivek Ramaswamy, he'll go on Fox News and spit Kremlin talking points verbatim, saying that Vladimir Putin was basically pushed into doing this. So it's just insane to me that we have Russian talking points being directed to millions of Americans, and Twitter's not helping, or X isn't helping at all.
That's one perspective. The other perspective about Elon Musk allows mis and disinformation. I think many people hold the perspective that Elon Musk is not being the arbiter of what is the truth and what is mis and disinformation. If it's all allowed, then he's not the one in charge of deciding what is or is not truth. Do you think there's any merit to that?
There is absolutely no thing that you participate in life where you're trying to sort noise from accurate signal where more signal or more noise is helpful. And it's a whole other conversation about like freedom of speech and these kind of like epistemic values that lead you in like good information gathering directions. But I think people have this really bad notion that if you want the truth to rise to the top, you just need more speech. Freedom of speech is great. We just need more speech and more speech and more speech. And that's just not true. It's not true anywhere. And the noise and the mess of what exists right now on the internet, especially in places like X, where people can lie with impunity, including the owner, who is now shamelessly in full support of, Donald Trump, who probably lies more than any politician person I've ever seen in my entire life. And this is in the same universe where Santos exists. It's absolutely insane. And I think people, I don't know what the conversation could even begin to look like, because when I say, like misinformation is a huge problem online, conservatives and Democrats will both cheer and applaud for exactly the opposite reason. So there's something that we're going to have to do to approach and change how we sort through like what exists online, what's allowed to exist online, or how people are allowed to propagate information online, because the current environment is never going to produce something good for democracy, I don't think.
Especially with AI.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it. It was either Matt Beat or Huey, but they talked about how essentially democracies are destroyed by like divisive realities and mistrusting one another and like misinfo, whereas authoritarian regimes are built up and reinforced by these systems, right? And so I think probably lots of people have seen like Ryan Macbeth on Twitter being like, at some point like misinfo Russian like bots and stuff like are these considered like armed combatants to some degree? Because it's so destructive for democracy to create a reality where you can't trust your neighbor and you don't even live in the same world where Democrats are now like creating hurricanes to hit Georgia and stuff. Like how do you even begin to wrestle with ideas in a democratic way?
Well, I was asking the Trump supporters yesterday. I have a bunch of clips of this. I go, would you rather vote for Kamala Harris or Vladimir Putin? A lot of them said Putin. I said the same thing with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un or Kamala Harris. A lot of them said, I'd stay home. I said, what if you're the tie-breaking vote? They said, I can't vote for Kamala. How much do you think Vladimir Putin is salivating when he sees that he waged an invisible war, essentially, without wasting any money on ground troops? And he has tricked half of our population with the help of Donald Trump into thinking all of this, that Vladimir Putin would be a better leader than Kamala Harris.
I mean, what was the quote? Wasn't there a quote leaked recently where Donald Trump was looking at Kim and he said, like, when he rises or when he does whatever, his people clap.
I want my people to do that.
my people to do that. Yeah.
Well, like when he was president, he talked to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and DoD officials. He's like, what about military parades, which is stuff that they do in communist countries? It's absolutely insane. But on that, kind of piggybacking off what Adam just said, this is why, for those of you who've like heard me occasionally in Steven's stream ask the question, and it is Socratic. It's like, if we experienced, God forbid, some sort of like terrorist event on a Democrat's watch, would Republicans rally around a Democratic president? If you recall, those of you who were around during 9/11, the expectation was if you're a Democrat, you shut the bleep up and you just rally behind the Republican. It doesn't matter what the policy differences are. That was the expectation. I am convinced, as I imagine many of you are, that in a counterfactual where it happens under a Democrat, you would not get that support from Republican, not just Republican voters, but Republican politicians. They would use it as an opportunity to undermine the Democratic president, and that's an asymmetry that we have to really push back on.
I do want to say that despite the fact that it has just objectively gotten just way crazier in the last 6-8 years in terms of misinformation, confusion, obfuscation, the liberal coalition in this country is doing a really good job. For the last 6 years, it's been sustained wins. I'm optimistic about this November, and it's in no small part because of people like you participating. So give yourself a round of applause once again for doing that. It's important, it matters, good job.
All right, Hutch fishing for the claps. I see where you're at. I see what you're doing. Okay. But we all agree that people lie on social media, and that's the biggest confusion because everybody calls everybody a liar. We see the no-use strategy, right? Donald Trump, I believe, tried to coup the government and steal the election in 2020. And what happened? Joe Biden endorsed Kamala Harris. We didn't do a primary. What's the word that popped up out of conservatives' mouths?
Coup.
They call it a coup. It's ridiculous. There's no comparison. But that's the strategy. And to the uninitiated, how do you even start to tell the truth? We agree that people lie, and that's where the confusion starts. But what do you do about that? What are the solutions?
I think it has to start in the media, whether that's people hosting debates, whether that's media officials covering like events. I think in the beginning, people were a little bit scared about coming off as too unhinged about Donald Trump. Well, in the very beginning, it was funny. People said, we have to be careful we don't normalize this. But then in the media's I guess, quest for legitimacy, they stopped criticizing Trump because they were worried that they were coming off as too unhinged. And somehow conservatives managed to get a grapple on the entire narrative on the liberal side as well. And I think that people in media need to be less afraid of calling out the insanity on the conservative side and just hardcore fixating on that. Like, you can't make concessions anymore to these insane people. Like, you have to be willing to lay, like, in a fact-based world and to just stick there. Like, if you want to have conversations, I was talking earlier with Josiah, if you want to have conversations about like the FEMA response and everything going on for the hurricane, well, let's start with some quotes from Republican governors about Biden's response. Do you acknowledge that these quotes are real? Like, before you even move on to any crazy thing about Biden, suiting up like Iron Man to block helicopters from rescuing people, like, it needs to be like a grounded in reality conversation, because conservatives are just completely and totally in another dimension right now.
I mean, you say that, but the media is everything. You can, if there's a narrative that you want or that you like, there is media out there that showcases that and that will obfuscate, that will refuse to cover a story and will hyper-focus and create their own narrative for any piece of information that's out there.
Deport them.
I mean, we can't have that, right? In fact, don't clap for that. I mean, whatever. You can clap for whatever you want, but
I think there are some
no,
basic
don't
things.
clap for that. I command you.
I think there are basic things that need to happen on media that I think could change. One, I think that there should be law. I think that nationalities should be forced to be shown for accounts that are operating on social media in the United States that do media reporting. Like if you follow 10 accounts for news and this law passes and you find out that 9 out of 10 of those accounts are run by foreign nationals, I think that's important information that's important for an American to know. I think there are other steps that you could take in that direction. I think that income sources should be disclosed from people that are doing major media in the United States. I think it's insane that you've got people that are earning millions of dollars from who knows what companies that are just like blatantly lying to the American public. I think that there are steps that you can take to move in that direction, but we need like a culture change like as well in terms of how we deal with misinformation online.
I do want to say this real quick because today was actually an inspiring example. So obviously we weren't able to create content, but if you go on Twitter, Aaron Rupar is somebody you should follow if you're looking for like really solid clips. And Sundays are really important for politicians because they go on the Sunday morning shows, Face the Nation, Meet the Press, Fox News Sunday. And what was interesting is on Meet the Press, Face the Nation, and this week, the one hosted by George Stephanopoulos, all 3 of those hosts on 3 different networks were interviewing Republican politicians and basically stopped the interview to hammer about the 2020 election because J.D. Vance, of course, he was doing pretty well in the debate, but arguably lost it at the very end because Governor Walz asked him a question, who won the 2020 election? Did Donald Trump lose? And he wouldn't answer. Gotcha. And so these Republican politicians were forced to answer the question on 3 different networks. And the host actually they didn't just say, hey, who won the 2020 election? And then when the Republican dodged, they just move on. They basically spun tires to say, we're not going to just sweep this under the rug. We're going to make a point to our viewers that you can't answer this question, and it's a basic one. I think that's a step in the right direction.
I think that's a step in the right direction, but not everybody's watching those networks. It's not the 90s anymore. We don't have the monoliths of media. We have a smorgasbord. It's a buffet of narratives. You can eat all the ice cream you want if that's what you like. You don't have to worry about nutrition.
I think like the internet's kind of the Wild West right now. You can be anonymous, you can say whatever you want, you can lie. There's like, right now there's a girl that's blowing up on Twitter being like, I'm a Coast Guard on the ground, and FEMA's actively turning away people. And like, again, I love Ryan Macbeth. He keeps on like tagging her and being like, you're literally lying. Take a photo with one of these emergency response workers, like prove your claims. And it's just going viral, and she's getting paid, right? And so they're like, there has to be some level of like regulation that occurs, which I know is like spooky with free speech. But the issue is that part of the way that you keep things like somewhat democratic and liberal and free is by having some inbound structure, right? Otherwise you're in a Moloch's game to the bottom of like hell. A lot of people disagree with me on this. I don't really know if there's any space for internet anonymity anymore. I don't know how we keep doing it in at least like this public social media way. It shouldn't be the case that Cat Turd gets like 50 to 70,000 likes and engagements and impressions, and like, who's Cat Turd? Who is that?
And wokeness is Jack Poso.
Do you think this is realistic, though? Do you think there will ever be popular support for ending anonymity on the internet in this country?
I think after some like major tragedy, that's when you're going to see like terrible, awful, acute reform. Probably.
And it doesn't have to be ending all anonymity, just anonymity related to media accounts. Like if you're doing media reporting, people should know who you are. It's insane that there are huge people that report. Like I don't think Ian Miles Chung, I don't think he's ever even been to the United States before. I don't even know if people know that. It's just insane how huge these accounts are and how influential they are to the American mind, and you have no idea who these accounts are. I don't think any other country in history would allow that. It's just insane.
I think that's a good start, but that's not a universal solution. That doesn't cover everything, right? Newsmax exists unless, listen, the reality of Russian disinformation and Russian influence in our media and leveraging our freedom of speech against us is real, widely proliferated. It's severe, but it's too convenient to say that could be, you know what I mean? That would be the one panacea that could cure everything, is if we got rid of foreign misinformation. There are excellent incentives to just lie, and it is a proven method now to, I think, grow a media company, is to just lie and tell people what they want to hear. There doesn't need to be foreign influence.
Well, I think to be clear, I think we'd all agree that there is no panacea. There is no putting the genie back in the bottle. You can take, social and political action to try to reduce it in certain respects, like, some of the proposals Stephen and Kyla were mentioning there. But to your point, like, there's no way to totally undo it. You also, I think, when it comes to just general dishonesty, going back to, elections and the Republican Party, I think that, you have to punish them at the ballot box. You have to show that this strategy of like widespread disinformation, like lying, politicizing FEMA response, that it's just going to result inevitably in an electoral defeat to the extent that that's possible. It's the only way they'll learn.
Do you guys think media literacy classes from a young age is a good idea, or is that a simplistic answer?
Yeah, but you need teachers that are media literate to teach the media literacy classes.
But
I don't think the issue isn't, this is something I've figured out. The issue isn't media literacy. People are way more media literate and scientifically literate, I think, than we realize. It's just that there's political weird locks in their brain that inhibit their ability to fairly evaluate something. Because as soon as you put something in front of somebody, you know, who's like, I believe every single thing Trump said, I believe everything, and then you're like, okay, well, here's something that Hillary said. All of a sudden, these people know like every single government agency. They know all the scientific fact reporting institutions. They're like, well, what's it? Like, they know the information, but there's like a social factor that's destroying their mind when it comes to evaluating stuff. It's so frustrating.
And a lot of times too, if you wrap liberal values in conservative rhetoric, like if you show that funding Ukraine is how you put America first, you can actually move these people over, which shows that they have like a rational strain in them. But obviously, I do think it largely is the media they consume, though.
I wonder if there's like, I'm actually just thinking about this. State-dependent recall kind of like cues that essentially when you're like in a feeling or thought or environment or like situation that is similar repeatedly, like hearing Republican talking points, it's easy to remember all the information you've consumed that feels and is similar. Whereas the moment you move out of that state and you're trying to recall the same facts, it's really tough. This is why, just pro tip, if you're taking university courses, you should study in the class that you're writing your papers and exams in, because you'll just perform significantly better. And so I wonder, like, a large part of this, when I look at like social media, and again, we can't put the genie back in, which is why we need like small things to disincentivize really bad actors, like demonetizing people who get community noted. If a community goes, this is false, that person should never be paid, and they should probably be like shadow banned for like a day or two. Like, there has to be consequences for like malicious actors, and it needs to be a decently high threshold, because we don't want people who like are misinformed but not ill-meaning necessarily getting the same like nasty hit as somebody who's like actively knowingly lying.
Well, what's the standard for that? Where do we draw the line? How can we confidently say this person is lying and it is malicious and they know what they're saying is not true?
I mean, this is such a large question. I think the same way that we build a lot of these bills and standards, like it's not, we'll have to test and try it out. I think different social media platforms will do different things, and probably through like capitalism and human ingenuity, we'll find some balance of a line to do there. But like, if you get community noted, I think it's super fair for that to get demonetized and for you to be shadow banned for like a day. It's not the biggest thing in the world, but you're not getting paid for
private consequences for dishonesty, so not necessarily judicial. And I wanted to touch on this. I had a strong reaction to this earlier. Donald Trump in 2016, I think before he even took office, I think it was a month or two after he basically won the election, before it was officiated, his first big move as the president-elect was to launch an assault on the media. He wanted to start his own media company, and we missed this earlier. We talked about distrust in institutions. I guess this can be rolled up into it. One of those institutions is the media. One of the biggest signs of an authoritarian leader is distrust of the media and trying to quell the media. So when he said, like, we need to deport them, that's why I had such a strong reaction. This can't be the solution, right?
And Trump literally just said he wants to strip the licensing away from ABC, right, after the debate. And then I think he said something about Fox News needs to stop showing all these liberals. He said something.
He said that multiple times.
We need to open up the libel laws. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like threatened the media multiple times.
I think this is why like bureaucracy is so unsexy, but this is why it's important. Bureaucracy can get bloated and doddering and out of touch, but this is why like science broadly as an institution is very self-correcting, right? When you ask like, what's the line of knowing somebody is like lying? It's like, okay, I'm not gonna make it up on the spot, right? It should be a system that gets built and tested just the way that science came up with peer review in the 60s to improve its quality. And now we're looking with meta-science and being like, oh, peer review is actually failing us because we don't pay anyone who peer reviews. So we should actually incentivize peer reviewers, right? There's little tricks that you can do over time to improve how these little tools and systems work so that they're doing less harm. And I think we have to like look into these things. They're just not like fun and sexy, but there is bureaucratic ways that we can kind of solve these problems.
I think on our end, one of the things that we can do is offer a better alternative. So if we can, right now it's just a case that the right-wing media ecosystem has a tremendous advantage, in my opinion. They're well-funded. They've been at this for like 10 years. They have massive audiences, and sort of like milquetoast liberalism, as you said, it's just not as sexy as what they're doing. Another challenge is, like you were talking about your conversation with Tim Pool today. And you were mentioning the fact that when you spoke with him, he was able to rattle off like 10 or 15 really niche kind of.
This happened in 1963. Did you know that?
Right, and so like they're really good at gish galloping and just throwing 15 things at you, and you have to be really sharp to be able to debunk that stuff, engage with that stuff, and for the average person who's working a 9 to 5, they just don't have the time to do that. And so, if we can help like build a successful alternative to that, then maybe we can sort of fight against it.